Hello, everyone, and welcome to Good Morning, Good Night, a weekly podcast where we talk about pretty much anything that comes up in life. Myself, Will Cho, also known as Chobra, and my good friend Matt Demers. We just like to kind of share our experiences, both of us having gone through what, some might consider, unique paths, but much more becoming, the norm in the current generation, and also now currently living on opposite sides of the world. We like to share what we've been through, how things have changed around us, and really just, discuss what's on our mind these days. So we'll start there. How's it going, Matt?
It's going pretty well. I'm terrible in terms of my energy today. It took me a really long time to go to sleep last night, so I'm just wrecked. But yeah, I know it's one of those things where sleep is like the thing that currently dominates a lot of my life in terms of trying to get it better, trying to improve it, that kind of stuff. And last night it took me just a couple hours to get to sleep, so I'm just just trying to get there essentially. But yeah, I don't know, how are you doing today?
Not much. Nothing too different.
I see you're kind of powering through the Final Fantasy series, because I the other day I just saw you playing 8, and then I look in your stream today and you're about at 9. So, no big deal. Those 40-hour RPGs, just power through them.
Yeah,
About
I'm not really
that.
sure how that's been happening. I think, so what's been confirmed, and this is something that I realized has helped me rediscover my joy of these longer RPGs, is being a optimization obsessed freak and perfectionist in terms of finishing games. Oftentimes, part of the fun, of course, in these longer RPGs was doing all the side quests, min-maxing my stats or whatever. But at the same time, if I wasn't able to constantly keep that up, right, with a game. So Persona 5 is a great example where I was doing it, I was playing it every day, even if it's just a little bit. I was getting through it, I was feeling good, and then I had to take a break for a week, right, because of work.
Yeah.
And then I was just okay, I can't, I don't know where to start again. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. That feeling sucks.
Yeah, you just lose that momentum. But now, streaming it and then just knowing the hype around it has gotten me to care a lot more, or put a lot more priority on the story, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I discovered after, for instance, Final Fantasy VII Original, that I had basically only done one side quest, right, out of all the big ones and things like that. So in some ways I'm missing out on content, but in other ways it's allowed me to just fully be immersed. Final Fantasy IX today started off on a different note. For those who played the game, I assume the jump rope mini game. I wasn't doing so well with it, so I made a bet with my stream chat. And now not only do we have to name the characters a certain way, but I am now scheduled to sign up and register for the next year's, or the next generation, I guess it's called, of the Twice fan club. Twice is a Korean K-pop girl group. So that was my consequence.
I feel like one of the things that got imported with esports is kind of symbiosis with Korean culture, is the concept of a fan club. And I know that those exist in Western music groups like the Beatles or whatever like that, but I feel like the concept of a fan club is kind of fallen off really hard, and the only time I really hear about it is in the context of K groups, but also in the context of esports, and primarily through Team Liquid and stuff like that, because I know a lot of StarCraft players and stuff like that had fan club threads on the board. So I don't know if that's just my armchair anthropology of where the current status of that is right now, but that's probably the only place that I actually hear them, an actual organized group, or something that you actually sign up for. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's just the way especially specifically K-pop, but then resonating from that to the rest of Korean media culture.
Yeah.
Just the way that the business is built around marketing, right? I think kind of lends itself to the notion of a fan club, and I guess I think the other thing that's interesting is, like you said, there have still been obviously like followings, right?
Yeah.
Different, like sports teams have always had fans, things like that. But the like term fan club or that notion of like what that entails, other than just I'm like cheering for them and like going to events or matches, right? I think is cultivated differently. Like even for instance, when it comes to like streamers, in Korea, like even the smaller streamers all have, so they call them cafes. So Naver is basically like the Google of Korea.
Yeah, it's
like the main like search portal, etc. platform. And so everyone has like a Naver or like a Daum cafe, and that's your like quote unquote fan club. But it's just message boards, right? And
it's like having really a subreddit.
But exactly, like in the West, you see it like in subreddits, or these days Discord, obviously. But the old traditional like discussion boards and message boards are not as common. Still some sites use them.
Oh, totally.
Whereas that format is so prevalent in Korea, and I think like fan meets are just done more often when it comes to whether it's like celebrities or whatever. Probably again just because it's easier because the country's so condensed, right? So it's easier to pick a spot and be like, oh, this isn't too unfair. Whereas like, how do you do that fairly in the US without doing like a tour, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's just something that I'm always like trying to be conscious of, at least with Canada and whatever, is like we in Canada, the joke is that when we do get esports, we have to like make it worth it to the person that's putting it on. We have to like show appreciation. So there's this mythical quality about Canadian fans, is that we know how hard done by we are for actual like events, because you've got like 3 cities. You got like Toronto, which is super expensive and doesn't really have a lot of venues. You have Vancouver, which again, super expensive, and why wouldn't you just do it in Seattle? And there's Montreal, it's bilingual. So it's kind of like, where else would you hold it? And then also like the infrastructure is really bad. The internet isn't as amazing as like the States. And it's like, why wouldn't you just hold it in the States? You won't have to worry about visas for your employees. You won't have to worry about people crossing a border in terms of fans. Make the Canadians go to the States rather than the States go to Canada. So that's kind of the big deal. And even with Valve and the International, that was a matter of convenience, because their normal venue wasn't available. So it's a 2-hour drive to Vancouver. They just figure, okay, well, we can get the Canucks Stadium. Let's just do it there. So whenever esports comes to Canada, there's always this kind of like hubbub of, we got to make it worth it. We got to show off that we're, hardcore fans and we appreciate it. So it's kind of like the mythical Filipino Dota audiences, or going to Manila or whatever. Is like usually like if you get a major or something there, the audience usually shows up. But something I wanted to touch on,
Katowice is a great example.
Yeah, exactly. I've been to Katowice once. That's my only excursion into Europe, actually, is going to Katowice. I've never been anywhere in Europe besides Poland, and Katowice is not a particularly colorful town. How I explained it, or how I described it, was it's
very accurate.
It's very gray. It's very gray and concrete. Yes. And but before we get there,
it's an industrial city.
Oh yeah, definitely. Before we get there, something I actually wanted to touch on is what I think just differentiates it is a level of independence and a level of group organization when it comes to fan clubs. Because this is one of the things that I'm always really like passionate about learning anyway, is the idea of fan culture and how people organize and that kind of stuff. And the idea with Korean fan clubs, or like, those kind of things, I don't mean to just generalize it, but that's the shorthand I'm going to use, is that there's tends to be a level of like, it's its own entity. It's its own almost like company, if that makes sense. I don't know what the word to use it. Maybe Absolutely. Group or maybe brand or something like that. Is it tends to be its own thing, where like when I was running EG's social media, it's not like we had a fan supporter group that had its own name and had its own, Discord and that kind of stuff. And that, I don't know if that's a language, maybe that's not a language barrier thing. Maybe with English fans it is, because they're not going to be engaging in like the primary like social media for a Korean group if it's all in Korean kind of thing. So maybe they just find their own venue. Obviously that doesn't cover like Korean fans doing the same thing, but like I don't know. I think that's a big deal with it, or a big difference at least, is that level of just independent organization, and it's almost something that's like growing independent of the brand, because sports teams have that. It's like my city got a soccer team last year, and there was these people who were like supporting the team from its inception before they'd actually like, you know, got organized and got like a slot or whatever. And of course those people have a name and a Facebook group and whatever, but that's almost like copying supporter legions from like European football and that kind of stuff, because like that's definitely like a thing. But I don't know, I think, like I said, it's what differentiates is just that level of separation. You don't have BTS fans, you have BTS Army, you know, and Army is like
Okay.
Sir,
what they're called.
Oh, sir, I follow a couple millennial ladies on Twitter. I get a very small trickle stream of K-pop and that kind of stuff. Very small, but I know Army. I think anyone on Twitter has probably run into Army people before. So, but yeah, like I think that's the differentiation, is just that little. It's almost like you have like I said, a separate company that's entire purpose is supporting another one. And that's like, if you look at people who like Disney or Marvel or something like that, you don't have that separate entity. You just have Marvel fans, or you just have Disney fans. You don't have the side company, if that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. The fandom is always interesting.
It's interesting. I think we see it a little bit. I think we probably see it a little bit with like streamers now, a little bit, just with how like mods and like chat becoming
VIP
its own entity,
and that
VIP,
kind of stuff.
like things like that is probably the closest it gets to like commonly seen in the West. But I do agree.
It's very weird because like I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and what kind of kicked it off was Twitch introducing cheering. I think cheering, like the bit system, was the first thing. This is just my theory. I don't know anything like for sure, but I get the feeling like that something inside Twitch's culture changed around the Amazon acquisition, and also, you know, the introduction of cheering, because they needed to find a way in order to centralize a lot of the ways that people support, and they also needed to find a way in order to incentivize support in the way that is I don't want to say recognizable, but just consistent. And I think the way that they chose to do that was money. The way that they chose to do that was pay money, get attention. And a lot of people will look at this as like a negative bitching. I'm not. I'm more just trying to think about how Twitch has incentivized a lot of things. So you've got bits leaderboards, you've got gifting sub leaderboards, you've got you know, emotes for Prime, you've got emotes for two-factor authentication, you've got emotes and titles and all that kind of stuff. And the majority of them is, I have spent X amount of money, I am entitled to certain status, where it's, you know, your sub streak or your total sub badge or whatever, even your founder's badge, which is, you know, the first people to spend money. So that's kind of like what I see a lot of Twitch by design has done. So again, it's that level of organization. It's like, sure, you might see it with mods, I guess, but like mods serve like a function. They're almost pseudo employees, you know, of the actual stream. It's not like, I imagine maybe with like Forsen, or maybe with some of those like cult like big streamers, you might have like, I see it with like the troll streamers, and like not the troll streamers that they are actively trolling, but like there are definitely streamers whose entire fan base are majority people who are showing up there in order to troll with other people or to troll the streamer. And those people have a level of organization. Those people have a level of like, oh yeah, this is the Force and Troll Discord, you know, or something like that. Not the official one, but this is like, we are united in common purpose. So I don't know. Like I said, that level of organization is probably the thing that's going to stick out a lot for me in terms of analyzing this kind of thing. But maybe it's just a Western thing. Maybe it's just something that we haven't caught on to yet. Or maybe it's just something that streamers haven't done a very good job of encouraging, you know? It's...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the biggest difference is just whether it's named or not, to be honest, right? Because if you look at like a lot of fan clubs in Korea, whether it's for K-pop groups or other celebrities, it's essentially like the most common things they do is like help set up events for fans, right? And then sometimes in official correspondence with the actual group and management agency, right, with like whether it's like fan meets or whatever, but they're the ones like that are getting the billboards for like happy birthday signs or whatever.
That's the level of fandom where like the West doesn't even touch. It's the seeing.
Yeah, but that's also, I mean, that's also, I think, just it's more easily done in Korea than like trying to buy a billboard in Times Square. You know what I mean? Yeah. There's definitely a financial and cultural difference there. But I guess what I was trying to say is like I see a lot of groups where like, yes, when it comes to streamers or even like esports teams, like at the end of the day, the core entity is still like in control, but like they do give autonomous ownership.
That's what I was going to
directly to these people, like to the like whether it's mods or whoever, to like run daily stuff on a Discord or what it might be.
That's what I was going to ask, is that like when it comes to autonomy, when it comes to independence, it's like, do you ever see these like groups, like hypothetical K-pop fan club groups, do you ever see them like becoming their own? Like, I'm just thinking, if I was running that group, do you see them producing their own merch? Do they try to become a thing? Do they try to springboard? No. Okay, I think that's also,
because that's not their entity though.
I think that's
because their entity relies on the like core celebrity.
Like
that's like why you exist.
No, totally. But I don't know if there's literally a formal home office of the BTS Army. But hypothetically, would they not create BTS Army merch? Or would they just encourage people to buy BTS merch?
But that's what I'm saying, right? It's like it's like that. That's where I think I see it as actually just more similar. It's just like the titles that are a little different, where you would never see someone like, you wouldn't buy a Patriots fan jersey, right? You would just buy a Patriots jersey.
I guess. I think
like that's how you show that you're part of that group. Is by wearing a Patriots jersey, I show that I am a Patriots fan. So by wearing a BTS like whatever, you show that like you are that there's a high potential that you are part of Army, in the case of BTS or something like that, where there's for instance there was like a question on a quiz show in Korea where the question was about like, how do North Koreans like know if someone's BTS Army? Like, okay, because there's like an underground cell of BTS Army in North Korea.
I wouldn't be surprised.
And so like they have like code signs to like ask
the French resistance over
like,
here
listen to the like new album or whatever. So
Swing Kids only with K-pop. That's a very deep cut. So I don't know if anyone else watched that movie.
So I don't think it's I can't imagine, like, even if it seemed profitable, right? I would not imagine that it would ever succeed for a fan club to suddenly become its own entity and like market itself. Because that's just it makes sense. Defeats the purpose of that. Yeah,
I think it's just like it's one hand me looking at it and being like, okay, the amount of that organization to like thrive requires a lot of altruism, and it also requires almost like a zero amount of ego, and I think that's what I admire a lot about these groups and what makes me look at them with such like a fascination. And no, okay, let me rephrase. There's a
lot of ego.
There is a lot of ego. There's a lot of ego, but at the same time that it's directed in a way that maybe this is an idealized like thought process of it, but even if there is ego in terms of like jostling for like social like points or like social standing or whatever, it does ultimately come down to supporting the group. like supporting, the thing. I guess where I'm seeing like the fan legion stuff, or sorry, like the individualized fan club merch and stuff like that is like, I don't know if I brought this up on the podcast before, but there's a great post that I read once where the reason why fandom has kind of exploded in the ways that it has in maybe the last 20 years is that you're seeing a lot of people in our kind of like generation, or maybe the generation after ours, not really having the easy time to find people who have similar values to them. So it used to kind of like be a thing where people would gather around religion, because not only would it be like a way of saying, okay, like you have the same values, but it's also a way of saying, I'm going to church, or I'm going to mass, or whatever, and I can have a reasonable assumption that the people here kind of believe or have the same values that I do. So it's easier to kind of like integrate into a social group. So I don't have any statistics obviously to back it up, but like I can say from people from my generation, at least, I grew up in a Catholic school. A lot of us like just didn't really want to be there, didn't really want to engage with our faith and stuff like that. And like that kind of led to a little bit of an exodus, no pun intended, of, people. Thanks, Will. I'm glad you got that. Exodus of people who are just like active practitioners and that kind of stuff. And on one hand, there's the religion aspect of it, but then again, you do lose that kind of implicit social group of being able to tell, who believes in the stuff that I believe and who kind of has similar values. And the thing with that is that that's been replaced with fandom. That's been replaced with, fandom for music, or fandom for Marvel movies, or whatever, Harry Potter, and being able to say, okay, you're a Harry Potter fan, even though it's a little bit more tenuous, you can at least say, okay, there's a reasonable belief that we at least have some common ground. Maybe it isn't saying, okay, you believe in the same value system as me, because that's very, like I said, nebulous. But at least with these fan legions and stuff like that, that's what I think is kind of the glue that's holding it together, is at least being able to look at the group that they like, or the team that they support, sure, and saying, okay, this value system, whatever. But where I'm coming from with the merch thing is more of, I know people are selfish. Like sometimes, like I don't want to say everyone is inherently selfish, but I know that in a lot of cases that people will exploit those kind of opportunities to get their own fame, especially if they're always looking at someone that does have fame, so that's why I'm a little bit surprised, I guess. And maybe like the feeling of,
well, there's a lot of power tripping for sure.
Yes, yeah,
even if it doesn't lead to merch and like money sales per se.
Yeah,
there's
I guess
definitely a lot of power tripping and control tripping for sure, until like the biggest ones are obviously like somewhat moderated by the entertainment company, or sometimes they'll there have been instances of like entertainment companies having to announce that they're like not affiliated officially when like a fan club.
Well, I mean, I guess that's the same thing with soccer clubs, is that like you have those hooligans, which their job, not job, but like, of course they like the team and they support the team to death kind of thing, but at the same time, a lot of the purpose they're finding in that fan legion is violence or escape, or camaraderie or brotherhood or whatever. That's what they're getting out of it. And like you said, it's certain things, certain actions obviously are less healthier than others. I don't know. Like I said, this isn't what we wanted to talk about this topic, or on this topic, but the idea of these kind of like microcosm cultures are always super fascinating to me. And like, as a marketing person, like you're always trying to crack the code, or at least be able to get better at reading people. That was the thing that with EG, we had a demographic imbalance where our demographics all just loved Dota, and they were all like, they're relatively a lot of English speakers, but like not really based in North America. So it was really difficult, right, or really different, at least, in order to analyze how, not just where people were coming from, but how specific cultures acted. It's like American fan culture when it comes to sports, and even when it comes to esports, is completely different to like Southeast Asia or Europe. So trying to be able to like backwards compatibility everything to just make it palatable for everything was kind of impossible. But it was this thing that I found really interesting all the time to just be able to try to like, try to make work.
Yeah.
Speaking of Katowice, I was about to ask, what's your favorite, like, getting back on the topic we originally planned, is like Katowice, nice esports city, but very gray and very industrial, and that's partially why it's an esports city, is that the venues are easy to secure, and there's a special kind of attachment for Michael Blizzchars, I think is his last name. That's probably not the way to pronounce it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He grew up there or whatever.
Carmack,
that's the word. I couldn't think of it. Couldn't think of the handle, but he works for ESL and he has a very close relationship with the local government there, so that's kind of why. But you probably have done a lot more traveling for work than I have. So our original topic for this week was, getaways or like favorite cities and that kind of stuff. And I think that esports is very unique in the sense that we get to experience just cities a lot more frequently than like the casual traveler, I guess.
Yeah, I would say I would say esports like ranks among the industries that like require more than average travel, right? Obviously, again, depends on like your role and like what division you're in or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I guess to start things off, one of my big regrets is in the beginning when I was traveling a lot, I didn't utilize it as much. Granted, if you're doing back-to-back events, like you don't really have too much time, right? You get in like Wednesday or Thursday, depending on the event length. You probably have like half a day free to yourself, but you're probably jet lagged, and then you like jump into rehearsal the next day, probably have another half day, and then it's event like 3 days, and then the day after you generally leave. And then if you have back-to-back events, you're probably busy going home to then like do laundry or whatever and take care of everything, and then go back out once again. But I think one thing I've always appreciated is just like even if it's just at events, right, or just going through the airports, etc., you just start to discover like what things you want or miss from certain cities, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, for instance, like I grew up in a city that was like barely being developed in Korea, like when we first moved here, and then also in the States, like I grew up in an upstate New York suburb, so not much to do. Bowling was like the most exciting thing to do in town.
I feel that. My town growing up had a bowling alley, and there are many a birthday party being spent in those bowling alleys. Yeah,
exactly. So with that, and then going to college, but from then on, I lived in New York City for college, right? Seoul for work, LA for work. So whenever I got to travel to, even if they were big cities, like other cities that just had more diversity, I guess, in terms of environment, and New Yorkers are gonna like probably rage at me for saying that, because technically New York is very diverse, but like I'll admit it, I just didn't explore New York a lot while I was there. I wasn't a fan of it while I lived there, so I just didn't spend time outside. And I think I often found that with like a lot of it really came down to just cities that have a lot of history. And that's gonna make it sound like I'm like bashing on US cities, because the US just factually has less history than other countries in terms of when it was founded, but as a country of the United States. But like some of my favorite cities would be like I would say like Krakow, Taipei, Prague, right? These cities that just have like they have their like big downtown areas, and they've got their like flashy tourist spots, but then they also still have like they're just who knows how many years old tradition, right? The like family owned little shop that's been around for who knows how long, and no one even remembers the first owners, things like that.
For me, For me, the thing that I like to do when I travel is I like to experience how people hypothetically would live, and I'm always trying to be like self-aware about like not being a terrible tourist, if that makes sense. But I like kind of acting as if I was already at home, if that makes sense. Like in terms of restaurants, in terms of like, I love going to libraries in foreign cities because usually there's free Wi-Fi, which is always nice. Just in case like the hotel that I'm at has terrible Wi-Fi or whatever, if I need to like get work done, or even if I don't want to really do anything that day, I would rather be somewhere quiet, somewhere comfortable, somewhere that you at least kind of get an idea of what the city, like regular people in the city are, because like tourists don't really go to the library unless it's like New York that has, you know, the library that Ghostbusters was filmed in and stuff like that. I don't know,
right?
Or like museums in that way. But like I've been to the library in New York, I went to a library in Japan. Like I don't know, it's just nice to be able to kind of like get a little bit of peace and quiet. But I totally feel you. Like I'm more of a city person than a country person, and I'm also not I'm not a sightseer. I don't like going to I don't want to say tourist traps, but I don't like going to like tourist attractions. Like if I was going to Paris, for instance, I don't really care about the Louvre.
You're not an Eiffel Tower.
I'm not an Eiffel Tower guy. I'm not an Arc de Triomphe guy. Screw that. I'm not. With Japan, like I went to Japan about a year ago in June, which I think about going back to Japan almost every day. And it blows my mind that in almost exactly a month, that's when I flew out to Japan. Like time friggin' flew. And I said, I miss Japan almost every day. But with Japan, I had a list of things that I wanted to do, and almost none of them were like super touristy. But I would just kind of like pick one or two things a day just to do. And that, talking to other people, that's kind of how like you had to handle it, because you would see other things that you would want to do. And if you had such a strict itinerary, you wouldn't really have the ability to improvise and just be like, okay, this is where I want to go, and this is, you know, I'm interested by this, so this is what I'm going to do today. You can't really do that in every city. Like some cities are less dense, I guess, but esports is always weird, right? Because I'm usually tired, like a lot of the time, like either from the event or like being on my feet or the flight itself. So I almost think that we shouldn't feel too guilty about like not taking advantage of the travel or like being in a certain city and going to do things, because like after our jobs, like you're on your feet all day, you're, you know, around people all day, you know, you're maximizing the risk of getting sick because of just how many people are like, you know, not even with the pandemic or anything like that, but even, you know, the joke is the land flu or whatever, because everyone just gets sick after these things. But, you know, that's just like a lot. And I'm definitely one of those people that my social batteries get expired very quickly, or drained very quickly. Let's put it that way. And I don't know, even with like Katowice, the only thing that I remember about Katowice is by the end of it, we went to a mall in order to do like duty free shopping and stuff like that, because alcohol is very cheap in Poland. Alcohol is very cheap in Poland. But being in that mall and being like, oh my God, there's a smoothie shop. I haven't had like fruit or like plant, like, you know, I all I've been eating is like hotel restaurant food and like fried food from the actual like venue. Dear Lord, do I just want a mango smoothie? Dear Lord, do I just want a strawberry banana smoothie? You know, like stuff like that. But I don't know. Travel it's weird because it's dictated by the type of person that you are and what you value in like your comfortable space. And I'm definitely always trying to like, in Japan, there was definitely a time where I was sitting there and being like, am I pushing myself hard enough? Am I pushing myself out of my comfort zone hard enough? Am I seeing all that I can see? But that's almost like contradictory, right? It's like you want to have fun more than you want to see as many things as possible, because then you're going to burn yourself out and probably hate it. So it's a very weird balance. I don't know. What kind of traveler are you in that regard? Do you find yourself like sightseeing a lot, or do you kind of like, I don't know.
I've thought about this a lot. So I don't mind sightseeing. well, I've definitely changed, and I think now I'm this like weird hybrid where just base personality wise, like no matter what I do, like I need to have plans, right? I need a plan A, a plan B, plan C. Like, all right, this is the schedule for the day, and if like something goes wrong, or if this takes too long, or if there's a traffic jam, like this is the next spot. Even like there was a time in LA when my friends and I went on like a not, I can't say it's a road trip, right? We drove like 3 hours out to a small town, and in my head I had 4 things planned, and it was like a day trip, so there was no way 4 things were happening. But in my mind there were 4 things planned, and then I was prepared to sacrifice like 2 of them. And like that makes me feel better than planning 2 things, right?
100%.
Like possibly one thing going wrong or whatever. But at the same time, like in the past, I would be obsessed about keeping to time, which, given my experiences and also just watching other people that are still very fixed on that, I think while there's nothing like wrong with it, I think it does take away the, I guess, priority of why you're there, right? It turns it into a mission rather than
it turns it into like a strict
like
checklist
enjoyment.
For me,
it's a challenge, right?
Yeah, for me in Japan, I definitely had like a tier list of things that I wanted to do, and by the end of it, there were certain things that I just dropped. Like I thought I wanted to go see the 1-to-1 scale Gundam, and then I found out that it wasn't like the classic Gundam. It was like Gundam Unicorn or whatever. And even though I've never watched the original Gundam, I don't have any attachment to either of those mobile suits, I guess. There's still that like, okay, it's the classic one kind of thing. It's also like going to the Tokukatsu Museum. I think that's the word. It's like the Kamen Rider and Tokusatsu, excuse me. It's like the Kamen Rider and like Godzilla and like all those kind of like, shows. There's a museum for that. And that was on my list. Having Kobe beef was on my list for Japan, and because like I'm obsessed with the stories of fake Kobe beef and like how you literally can't get legal Kobe beef in the States except for like very few places, and most people are like selling you like counterfeit or like fake. But all of those things kind of dropped off because I was like, okay, I'm not like, if this was like one of the Gundam Wing Gundams, because that was the only Gundam I've really watched was Gundam Wing when it was translated and dubbed, then maybe I would be a little bit more obsessed about going. Like even the Gundam Cafe in Akibahara, I saw it and I was like, I would only really be going to like acknowledge that I went. I wouldn't be going because I was like super interested in it, and gotcha. As I got more tired, like throughout my trip, there were a couple days where I was like, I have been walking for like a week straight. I'm not a particularly fit person. I'm working on getting better with that, but there were some days where my quads and like my glutes and like other muscles were just like, you need to stay home. You need to just stay in your hotel room and you need to just like chill for a day because you can't do anything. So those were days. I finished Metal Gear Solid 3 on my trip to Japan and with an emulator, because that's how I spent my days off. Was I played Metal Gear Solid 3.
I respect it.
Hey man, it's a backlog, but yeah, I don't know. There were other things where I was a lot more like, I need to do this. It's like I went to the Dragon Quest Cafe. I went to the Monster Hunter Cafe. I went to a bunch of stuff from Yakuza. And I did a day trip to Hiroshima because there was a Dota tournament there. I went to Mara Cup, which is like the big Japanese like Dota 2 thing. There's only maybe 100 people there, but I wanted, before I went, I was like, okay, I need to give Mara an EG jersey just to thank him for carrying Japanese Dota, which is like a very niche market. A lot of people don't play Dota. They barely even play like League or MOBAs, right? So going there and being like, thank you, Mara, for doing this thing, and then also getting like the great kind of experience of getting to just sit with like, maybe 50 people in the crowd and watching like this Dota match that, you know, there's barely any stakes, but, you know, it's pride. And it reminded me what like primal esports is outside of all the corporatization and that kind of stuff. It was like pure, and I really appreciated that. And even just having a couple more hours to just, you know, wander around Hiroshima, and like I went to like the bomb epicenter or like hypocenter or whatever. I went to the Peace Dome. It's like even just going to Sendai for a day to go see a band because they weren't playing in Tokyo. I could only get tickets for Sendai. So I had a rail pass and was like, I guess we're doing a 1-day trip to Sendai in order to go see this band. And I don't know. I could speak forever about Japan. It was just like, I'm not a big traveler, and I almost feel guilty sometimes being like, I'm more of a homebody, you know, I'm more of a person. I love staycations. But I think where I'm going with this is that usually when I'm traveling, I'm looking for something that feels like home, and not home in the sense of my apartment here, but home in the metaphorical sense, you know? And that's usually what I'm trying to get out of my experiences when I travel, is just finding things that feel like home, and finding things that feel like I have a place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, listening to it, I think it sounds like while you're not looking for the like stereotypical tourist spots, but you do have very specific spots you want to go to.
Yeah.
Or like you would like to find places that fit that category, so to speak, right? I think for me, I mean, you know, they're like, I think the biggest thing for me is I actually think I'm just like it just comes down to I'm not a good group traveler.
That's another thing I was going to ask about, actually.
Like,
so yeah, go into that.
I don't mind it, but like, so for me especially, I think it's, again, I think I've changed, but I think especially because I've traveled so much for work, and you know, like I always had to be around people, and similar to you, like my social battery is actually pretty limited compared to like what my job is. So for me, if I'm traveling and like if I want to fully enjoy it, so there's two groups, right? If I'm going for the sake of spending time with friends, I'm like kind of just telling myself, okay, the investment here is to not just sound cliche, but the memories we make, you know what I mean?
Yeah, of
like
course, of course.
If I can convince myself, if I can convince myself that that's the goal, then it's fine. And at that point, like I will almost just like give up things I want to do, right? But then, for instance, there was a time when in LA where me and like two friends were thinking about a trip to Joshua Tree, the park, and it was just going to be like an Airbnb, just chill, right? Go out, see the stars, things like that. And they were like, oh, maybe we should invite so-and-so. And I'm sitting there and I was thinking just, honestly, this one I need to be like my healing moment. And if there's any more people, and if it's anyone else where I feel I need to like engage in their activities, I'm not going to be able to enjoy it because I'll do that just instinctively, right? It's almost like the workaholic kicking in of like, okay, well now I'm with this friend and like I gotta do this. And it's not that I hate it, but I will regret that I did that willingly, so to speak, right? It's not that they're forcing me or anything. It's just that's how I would react. So I think nowadays, if I were to choose like my dream travel, it doesn't have to be alone. You know, a lot of times I actually do appreciate, you know, like one or two, you know, like a small group. But at the same time, I've always spent so much time alone ever since college, just, you know, living alone and things like that, that I also don't mind like traveling alone. For instance, I went to Portland just to like de-stress a year ago, or a little more than a year ago over the winter, and I was there for 2.5 days. And one of the days I like went out, and I didn't have big plans. I kind of had I had the map on my phone, and I knew of kind of the 2-3 big spots that I might want to drop by, so I'd wander aimlessly in that direction. But if I found a shop, you know, I'd go in, and you know, if I got a little hungry, I'd like look for just something random. I wouldn't like Google it, you know what I mean? Or I'd search just in like the immediate neighborhood. And so that day, I think that day was the day I ended up walking nearly as much as the most I've ever walked at an event which I think was the record I've had is 27,000 steps. Maybe it was 30. Something close to 30.
Do you have a Fitbit or something like that?
It was on my smartwatch at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, so, but that day in Portland, I ended up almost walking just as much, but obviously it was across the whole day rather than, condensed into an event and, like, running around. But I did feel tired. And, like, the things I ended up doing that day were, like, buying some books, getting a massage, and then watching Into the Spider-Verse on my own.
Into the Spider-Verse is great.
Like, I mean, it's great. I had no regrets, but it was just, like, I was almost surprised that, like, that was never, watching Into the Spider-Verse was never in my plans, right? I wasn't planning out my trip being like, I'm going to fly to Portland and watch Into the Spider-Verse, right? Like, that was never there. But at the same time, I was, like, pretty content with what I had seen in the city. And I was like, this city's cool. There's not as many things that I'm like, I think I would be as attached to, but that's okay. And then the first day I got there, I immediately got, a rental car, and because I went to de-stress, I just this was almost dangerous. I rented a convertible, and then I just started driving towards the coast.
Hey man,
because I was like, I just want to drive through some nature.
Yeah.
The only problem was it was a very, very cloudy and cold day.
Nice.
And so as we're going through the mountains, obviously things start getting a little icy in the air. And like,
did you know how to put the top up?
Car.
Does the top come up?
Yes, I made sure I checked that before I got into the mountain zone. But the problem, I was a little scared because I was like, shoot, because my reception starts going out, and I didn't like bring a map, right? Because I didn't have a plan.
Yeah.
So I was like going, and I was like what happens? Like, what happens if something happens in this mountain? Like, am I just screwed? And I just like sat there, but then I ended up making it to the coast and things like that. So I think I've now grown more into a spontaneous traveler, or being okay, or learning how to enjoy that. And I think even compared to you, like, I think when it comes to attractions, whether it's the common ones or not, I don't think there's as many things as I'm attached to. The only thing would be like if an area is known for a very specific type of food, then I would be like, I have to go to a place. But I also wouldn't mind if it's like not the place, right? If it's not the number one place, especially if I'm traveling. Like, listen, I'm a foodie, but also if I'm there for one day, I do not want to spend 6 hours in line.
No, totally, totally.
I mean? Like, I'm pretty sure I'll be content with number 3. Like, I'll be content with the number 3 spot, because also I just don't know any better, right? So I'm like, okay, totally. The number 3 spot's like cool.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you a question now. Do you, if you're traveling with other people, actually first I wanted to say that on your point of like growing older, or like growing up or growing older or whatever, and getting like more comfortable with just kind of like being improvisational, I think that might kind of come with like when we're younger, we might not have the money to be able to just be like, okay, we can, go again kind of thing. So for me, I'm definitely one of those people that, especially with Japan, I was like, I don't know if I'm ever coming back. And like by the end, I was like, yeah, of course I'm coming back. That's the only place I really want to travel now. So, I definitely want to go again. But I think when you're younger, you don't know how much longer you might have in that space. So especially for work and stuff like that, it's easier to kind of like do nothing with work, because it's not like you're paying for it. Usually with work or whatever, you're kind of like, your company's picking up the tab or whatever. When I was freelancing or whatever and traveling, there definitely was a pressure to like do more with it, because, I was paying for the trip and needed to make it like compensate for itself. But, where I wanted to go with that, or what I wanted to ask, is that if you're traveling with other people, do you feel responsible for other people's fun? Do you look at, because like I've definitely been on a couple like trips with just one friend, or hosting people. Or like hosting people who are traveling or visiting or whatever. Even with Animal Crossing, I know this is a silly thing, but it's like I have this weird anxiety where I'm just like, am I being a good host? Am I being a good travel partner? Are they having a good time? Mm-hmm. And there's always the thought of like, am I sacrificing my good time or like what I want to do just to make sure that someone else is having a good experience. I don't want to say have a good experience with me, but like, I don't know. Maybe that's just me overthinking it. But sometimes definitely with traveling, I'm definitely like, yeah.
I would say for me, it goes back to just like my habit / personality, where it's not necessarily because of the travel, it's just how I am around people. So generally, like, some people are gonna take this the wrong way and get hurt if they hear this, but I'm not very close friends with a lot of people.
Yeah, me too.
There's gonna be some people out there being like, "Am I one of those?" And I'm like, don't worry about it. But I don't consider myself. I could probably count the people I would actually consider close friends, like, within less than like the 5 fingers on one hand, right? So, and the way I classify that is if those are the people where I can just sometimes, obviously depending on the situation, right? If they're going through something, a hard time, then that's a different story. But sometimes I can just not give a damn about like their enjoyment or like their time factor, right? Obviously I respect their time, but you know what I mean in terms of like the value that they're getting out of it. So those would be limited, but other than that, just right, like for instance in school, like I've always done student council. I did an a cappella group in college. I was always like getting people together. Like that was always something I just did in every group or environment I was in. So now by habit, I almost instinctively, when I meet people, and some people, are might be not offended, but a little like miffed that this is how it is. But like when I meet people or when I go to a social setting, instantly, my mind like scans the environment, right? And I say, okay, so how do I boost their environment, right? And if
you like being
really
the glue,
something like I can't do. Yeah, and if it's something I can't do, or if it's like something against my morals, or say, or whatever, then I leave, right? Then I'm like, okay, well, I can't, right? Because I can't sacrifice that. Plus, I'm not like close enough where I want to be that person who like doesn't give a damn about their enjoyment. So, like now I leave, or I excuse myself. But so that comes into play in travel where, I don't. It's not because we're like say traveling, but that's just how I am. But it hasn't. It's never felt too much like a burden. More so, just it goes hand in hand with like I like planning. So for me, it just goes hand in hand. Okay, well then I'm gonna set up all these plans, and then if I know the group I'm going with, then I can kind of I hopefully I can gauge what their interests are. So I'll have these different sets of plans that cater to the different people in the group. And then even if it's on the fly, like I can kind of mix and match to make sure that their overall enjoyment levels. The more I talk about this, the more I sound like some robot, but that they're like even across the board, right?
No, totally. The thing is that those people's enjoyment, like especially if you're traveling as a group and you don't have that kind of like separation of being able to say, okay, I'm going to go off and do my own thing, have for this day or whatever. If you're hypothetically, I think probably some of the worst travel experiences I've had are those kind of weekends where everyone's just like stuck together and one or more people are not having the same amount of fun as everyone else. So it kind of degenerates. It kind of like creates like a weird vibe, or you don't have that opportunity to kind of separate and go have fun yourself. So it's an interesting like way of looking at it, and I think the difference is just confidence, because like you were saying, it's like you're used to kind of engaging with those groups already. It's like I think that, like, without getting too like sad sack, I guess it's like I was bullied a lot growing up, and like I still don't really consider myself having like two very like close friends that don't exist like just purely online. It's like when it comes to like, I call them physical friends, and that sounds really weird and almost like an innuendo, but like friends that I hang out with, friends. Like IRL friends, like friends that you just like hang out with regularly. And I think that kind of carries over to if you're traveling, because sometimes the experiences I'm thinking of where I've gone out of my way and it's not their fault at all. Like, this is the thing, is I'm trying to take personal responsibility for that kind of like overthinking about someone else's experience, because it's not like they've demanded it. It's me trying to basically say, if I make sure you have a really good time, you'll want to hang out with me again. And I know that's not I'm not trying to self-deprecate too much. I'm aware of that's like a kind of a weird way of looking at it, but I don't know, if you're confident with your ability to kind of like assert yourself, or you're confident in your kind of like place in that kind of like social group or whatever, it probably becomes a lot more easy to just kind of like stand up for yourself. And I'm not trying to, like I said, not trying to just like I preface things a lot. I tend to just like try to take almost too much responsibility for the things I say. So I'm not trying to like inspire a certain amount of sympathy and saying, oh man, Matt has no friends. But no, it's more of just like, I'm still trying to like figure that out. And it feels weird to do that so late in my life, or like comparatively so late in my life. But I don't know. It's traveling with friends, especially ones that you've never met in person. I went to New York with a friend of mine who I felt like, oh God, I'm surprised that they even want to like travel with me in the first place. So that kind of is what kicked off that feeling of, I need to make sure that they have a good time. I need to make sure that they enjoy my company. I need to make sure that they're, they're having fun. And that kind of self-sacrificing behavior, it's definitely, it's two things. It's hoping that it will be recognized and rewarded, but it's also like, it comes from like a martyr syndrome sometimes. And I don't want to say this is every case or every person, but it's also if people notice that I'm not having a good time, they will notice and try to put that same energy into me. And that's a less like mature and a less kind of like healthy way of demanding that attention or energy than just being direct about your communication, just being able to say like, hey, I need this alone time, or hey, I want to do something that I want to do. It's counting on other people to be able to notice and also like make that connection, instead of just being healthy and just being able to say like, just say it directly, don't almost pseudo guilt someone in order to do it. So
sure. I will say, just on this topic shortly, I think our culture has evolved into going too far the other way of like the honest conversation is the healthy way. Whereas, like, just as human beings, I don't think that can be as common as we would want it to be, right? Like, even if everyone tried, I just don't think it's that possible. And so because for me, that education breeds more guilt for some people, right? Of like, oh, like now I'm not being honest, right? And it's like, sometimes you that's just how you survive in a social relationship,
of course,
right? And that like the difference there is like you then have to accept like what that social relationship is. But going back to the like traveling with groups, the other thing, just listening to you, I think is for most of the time I would consider that I looked at myself in a more of a for lack of better term, leadership position in a group, right? So the one that's like furthest from, the reason I hesitated on the word leadership is the one that would be furthest from leadership is, say, if you're at an esports event, if I'm at an esports event, right? But if I was the host, or especially if I'm like the producer, I still, and I'm there as a job, right? At the end of the day, like it might be free time, but I'm still there for a job. I represent, myself and my brand and a company. And so there's like, it's easier for me to look at it as work.
Oh yeah, totally.
And so same with, if especially a lot of my close friends in LA, for instance, obviously came from my church, which was Korean. So even if there were Korean Americans there, or just Korean, second gen or whatever, studying abroad, most of the time it was with people younger than me. And so just culturally, I now feel a responsibility for them, not for as a friend, but just as a older brother, right? Like there's that other responsibility that almost feels like work. So for me, I don't know if I've ever really considered too much about like I basically probably didn't even again, hopefully people don't take offense from this and get what I mean, but I probably just didn't even look at it as a friendship relationship, but more of like, this is just something I have to do, right? And so for me, the de-stress parts then comes in. So when can I not look at it as a job, right?
Yeah.
And that's where it gets a little rare. And I think that's why I've grown to be okay or be able to enjoy like traveling alone. For instance, like last year when I visited Korea before I moved out here, or 2 years ago, I also just like drove down to Busan, right? I just went down just on my own, no plans. Once again, right? I just got there. I like the city. For anyone who gets to visit Korea, obviously, if it's your first time, like Seoul alone has so much to do, but Busan is another place where it's a big city, so it's not. You still get the city feel, but there's just so many different aspects of like what Korea is like that you can see, right? Especially because it's a port city and things like that. But yeah, I just drove down there and I had an idea of like certain types of like food I would want, or things I want to experience. But I got there and then I unpacked and I sat there and I was like, okay, like how do I want to spend my day today? And I think because of all that, I think nowadays I see just traveling more as disconnecting rather than like visiting that place, right? For me, the priority is more so disconnecting than like, oh, I want to intake all this like culture.
Oh yeah, totally.
Tourism. And that's just different priorities for different people. But
Will, I have a challenge for you.
I think the more I listen to it.
I have a challenge for you. Next week, we're going to come back to this podcast. And I've seen other people do this, and this is I like the concept of this kind of idea of a podcast. Is that there's a podcast I listen to called Gigaboots, and they do a thing where I think it's called Armchair Developers, where they get a topic and they present a hypothetical game to the audience, or not to the audience, but like to their group. I think it's like 4 or 5 guys. So they'll say, okay, well, you have to make a new Resident Evil game, but it has this like caveat to it. And the idea is to either make it as dumb or just as funny as possible, etc. I don't know. I think they do some things with like, not telling people certain things or whatever. I don't know, whatever. But my challenge is basically, I think next week we should come back, both of us, and the ideal vacation for both of us. We should just be like, okay, this is my list. This is the city I want to go to. This is the thing I want to do. This is the thing I want to eat. Not maybe day by day, but at least in a way that is just like, okay, this is the definite thing that I really want right now. Maybe not, permanently. Maybe our taste will change, but at the same time, I feel like there's a lot to learn about both of us in the sense of if we could just like travel again, because we can't now, where would we go? What would we do? What are both of us like craving the most right now?
I mean, I'm down to do it. Okay. No, well, you know what? I'll talk about it after the result.
Okay.
I'm down to do it.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it just keeps the more we talk about these different things, I think I just realize like how little I get like I don't mean this in a negative term.
No, of course.
Fixated on things.
Oh yeah, totally. That's why I'm forcing you to do it though. That's the thing, is like I know that both of us could sit here and be like, oh yeah, we it doesn't really matter about the place or whatever. I'm just looking for a specific experience. But it's like I almost want to just like prod and just be like, no. Let's force ourselves out of our comfort zone here and actually like force us to pick something.
No, it's just when it comes to favorites, like it's I don't know. I don't know if it's so much that I'm like uncomfortable picking a favorite. It's more there's a risk that I end up choosing a place for the sake of choosing it because it actually doesn't matter, right? Or because there's like 5 instead of 2 or whatever. But
it's more of the fantasy, if that makes sense. It's more about the fantasy. It's more about the like not actually like committing to the next one being like wherever you're going. It's more about just being like, you know what, I really want to go to Iceland and I really want to go sit in like a volcanic spring and I want to go like walk on the side of a volcano and that kind of stuff. And I think there's some good conversation to be had around that. Where can people find you on the internet, Mr. Chobra?
You can find me on Twitter, Twitch, twitch.tv, and Instagram at Will Chobra, so WILLCHOBRA. You can also find me on my community Discord server, which the most convenient way to find it is actually to either go to Twitter or Twitch, and they will be pinned on the screen, so you'll be able to find those links very quickly. I stream, I try to stream 6 days a week, going through mostly single-player games these days, but now that Valorant Korean servers are open, and I did thankfully secure access, hopefully I'll be playing some of that too, but we'll see how my time's spread out. That's the immediate news. Hopefully over the summer there are some other content pieces I am trying to plan out with some people that can work out, and I'll be able to visit people across more platforms.
Nice. The funny thing is, I got an email from Valorant today being like, here's your player badge, and they were like, do you not have a key yet? Well, you might not get a key. It literally wasn't like, everything's open. I don't know if I can bring it up, but they literally sent me a thing that was like, your exclusive Valorant player card is here. You logged in, you linked accounts, you watched a lot of Valorant, maybe too much in some cases. You watched enough streams to qualify. Now it's time to wait and see if you get in. So they wanted to give me a player card, and they're like, nah, we don't know if you actually are going to get a key yet. And it's like, oh, thanks, guys. I really appreciate you marketing to me, even though I can't play your game. The other thing I wanted to ask, when you spell out Chobra, because you spelled it out letter by letter, do you have like a rhythm? Do you like have a rhythm in your head? Because like for me, even when I was a kid, DEMERS, there's like a rhythm in my head when you like say that, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's something that you just do unconsciously.
I've never thought about it, but I do know that oftentimes if you have to group words, I believe 3 syllables is like the easiest.
Oh, nice.
I think I've read that somewhere. And also the fastest rapper in Korea purposely groups all his words in 3 syllables.
Ooh, I like that you know that. I like that you found that out. But syllables and metering for me are one of those things that I'm super anal about, especially when it comes to when I went to journalism. This is going to be a short story because we're wrapping things up. But when I went to journalism school, I love just like writing as if I was talking. And the one thing that they hammered into me in my first 2 years was I needed to know structure. I needed to learn how to like structure my pieces instead of just writing whatever came out of my head. So it's almost one of those things that I hated and I fought against, because I was like, I know I like blogging the way that I blog, but it's almost like I took that thing that I hated and molded it into something where like now structure wise, or I can look at a tweet and how I've kind of like taught people how to write copy from like my school of writing social copy is you have to look at a tweet almost visually and see the length of words and the way that it comes out. You almost have to like make it into like a Tetris game where you're fitting different lengths of words and rhythm of words and visual design of how the tweet looks and is visually balanced. And you have to almost do that with essays and other things, but syllables and rhyming and repeated words and stuff like that, when you get something just right, it's really satisfying. For me on the internet, I'm currently playing through the Ace Attorney series of games. They're very fun. I've played the first one out of there's like a classic GBA trilogy, or like GBA and DS trilogy, and I've played the first one before and completed it, but I haven't played it in about like 10 years. So I'm playing the first game. I'm on the 4th out of 5th case. I don't know when I'm going to be streaming the next part of it, but I did the first part of that. And otherwise, I don't know. I'm probably going to be doing some writing and stuff this week for my personal site. You can find all my stuff at mattd.cc. Or no, it's not even .com. So let me try that again. Just mattd.cc. So that'll bring you to a Linktree site with all my social links and that kind of stuff. But other than that, I don't know. Things are kind of chill in my neck of the woods. I don't know.
Where can people find the podcast, Matt?
Oh, yes. Podcast. Podcast is at gmncast.com. You can email us at gmncastmail@gmail.com. That goes straight to my inbox. And then you can check out the Reddit, which is reddit.com/r/gmncast. That has individual episode threads where you can toss us comments or whatever, questions for the next one, etc. And we'll definitely get to them. So thanks for all the support so far. We've definitely seen like a lot of people like between April and May. or sorry, we started this in March, so it goes March, April, and May in terms of our analytics, and like being able to see like positive growth over those times is always like really nice, and being able to see like which episodes people like more and that kind of junk. So we kind of didn't start this with any kind of like goal. We just really wanted to kind of just talk and kind of just put something out there. So it's nice to just see it be well received. So thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. So Will, I hope you have a good night.
Thank you, and have a good morning, Matt.
We'll see you guys next week. Cheers for now.